Welcome to the CEO of Destiny podcast, where you will find the tools to fulfill the purpose of your generation and wildly succeed in the marketplace. And now your host, Andre J. Benjamin.
What can you speak to us about the pearl? Talk to us about the pearl. We want to know about
I will. I'm gonna bounce back for just a second on processes, if you don't care. That's okay.
No, I won't.
You talked about the movie Click. I think about there's a play called Our Town. It's an old classic play. I'm sure it's been turned into a film, but there's a line in that where it sounds creepy. It's not. It's great. But they're in the grave, but they're talking to each other like in this afterlife kind of context, and they're able to see people living life and just kind of going through the motions. And the one girl says to her mother, how do they not understand the beauty that they're missing? Doesn't anybody recognize how precious and beautiful life is in every moment? And I think the mom's response says some artists and poets maybe, but for the most part, we don't. And that was a play that we actually did in high school. And that line always resonated with me because I think that we don't always see the beauty and the things that are happening. But I would say that I have found finding process and following process, although sometimes meticulous, leads to a lot greater reward. And that doing the process for me is a lot more rewarding because I'm in control of it. And I think when I put out markers that I'm not in control of, going viral or, things like that, that's easy to be very discouraged instead of just being okay, what's in my control, and to go ahead and and seek that kind of process, if that makes sense. But the pearl, I can tell you about the pearl. The pearl is,
before you go to the pearl, I want to build off what you said. You said the statement that it's almost, and this is what many have found has been therapeutic or helpful for them during this challenging time that many are going through, is to learn to control that which they can control. So it's controlling the controllables. Can you delve a little bit more into that, about why that is important and how you found that has been helpful? Because you talked about almost this ideal of some rubric and some metric that you can't, I'm going to have 7 million people by the end of the month following me on, some nebulous platform. But what does that mean to you? About how did you even find to scale back from the ideal to the actual thing that you can have impact with?
Yeah, I think for me, I started kind of looking at all of the things that I do and finding where am I finding the joy in that? And I found that I didn't have as much joy from bringing home a great deal of money from a craft show as much as when I would be working through a new piece and trying to do something. And maybe I had invested, sometimes I've been working on things for years, but sometimes because people are you can't do that. And I'm I'm going to figure it out. And to know that sometimes cutting a rock that had shattered several times on me, that I just really struggled with that material, and finally coming out with exactly what I had been going for and knowing all the hours and time behind that, I felt far more proud of myself for those things and for sticking with that than even when I would actually sell the ring that went into. And so being able to find that, and I think for young people, sometimes that's missed. And there's just a lot of value and pride that comes in working hard for something. And even if that's, trying to plant a garden or, setting out to run a mile every week or whatever that might be, when you actually start realizing that you're capable of working hard for something, whatever that is, I think that's a very empowering thing to be you don't have to, you are in control, right? So, yeah.
Awesome. I love it. So the pearl, take us to the pearl and unpack how the origin story of the pearl and what the pearl means to you.
Sure. So I have had the blessing of having a working space to some capacity for a little while now, but Even my college dorm room, I had like a bunch of tackle boxes that I'd shove under my bed when I would pick them up. My sweet roommate dealt with a lot of junk scattered around our room often. And so I've kind of always had like some sort of thing with me that I want to make. And as I grew up, and then as Caleb and I got married, we had a spare bedroom before having kids. And so whatever spare space there was in the house was like unspokenly mine. Like I'd move my workbenches in, do all the things. And we had a small garden shed at our last house that I worked out of. And then when we moved to the house we're currently in, there was not extra space. We were up to 4 kids, and we don't have more bedrooms than that. And so I worked out of the garage and just kind of started putting money aside for someday something, and not really knowing what that was going to be. In my head, I really wanted that to be a downtown building. I thought I'd like to move downtown, move all my stuff there. When all my kids are in school, I'll drop them off at school. I'll go to work at my studio. It'll be great. I had this whole idealistic thing. And I guess technically at that point in time, we had 3 kids. And then we had our 4th. And so that set my timeline back. I had kind of sat down when my oldest went to kindergarten and went, how many more years do I have of staying at home and working and balancing all of this? And what does my business plan look like? And so while it probably looks fairly unintentional to a lot of people, there was a lot of intention and process in growing my business from what does it look like when I have kids at home that are 0 to 4 to what does it look like when I can get my kids in school and actually separate my time where I have working time and I have mom time. And so looking at that, I thought, wow, I'm still quite a few years out from having everyone in kindergarten, which would be a full time here. Everyone would be in school. So I looked around and I actually ended up passing on my downtown building option for a while and built, well, really just brought in like a portable shed space we have 5 acres. And so we brought it in. So it's still separate from the house, but it's enough space for me. When I brought it in, I cut out all of my machines to scale and played like paper dolls to make sure everything would fit and work, because if I was going to make the investment, I needed to know it would work. And the timeline on it was, this is going to let me know if I can work from home and keep doing this, or if I still think I want to move downtown by the time everybody's in school, and making sure that financially things are back aligned. So it'll all be paid for by then. And we did most of the renovations ourselves to make it work. And so I have this space where people can come out. And so I host clients there. I do a couple open houses. I've done some classes, but it's like 14 by 36, I think. So.
Can you go back a little and talk about the different iterations before you got to the Pearl? What were the other spaces that you worked out of? Because I want people to hear that and not get discouraged if they have a starting point, because like we talk about the event, and people saw that, if they saw the hundreds of thousands or so that are reading the magazine you were in, or people who might go to your website and then they see it and they say, oh man, I don't even have anything close to that. I'm wasting my time. I'm not going to get to this. Who am I kidding? You know what I mean? But all the negative voices that come in saying these type of things, can you walk through the iterations of what you had to work with first and how?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I had my shoe boxes and tackle boxes under my bed in college. It would have been similarly.
Shout out to roommates of creatives in college, right?
Yes, absolutely. Man, she made my world work. She's the best. So did that. Then post college, I had a new roommate who I don't think knew what she was in for in that realm. And I was like, hey, she was a school teacher. She said, can I put my desk in the dining room? And I said, yes, if I can put my desk in the dining room. And she said, yes. I'm so sorry, Jennifer. And my desk at that point was this large, I still have it. If you've seen the magazine, it's in there. It's a large wooden cabinet that was like a baker's cabinet that my dad kind of rebuilt and reconfigured. And so it has a whole bunch of boxes, little tiny boxes at the top that were all organized with all these tiny little findings. So we had like a card table with 2 chairs for our dining room table. And then we had this like massive desk, and I would try and not torch there because that wasn't really in the rules. And then her desk across from me. So we used that space. And then when Caleb and I got married, we had we actually ended up using like an open room for our bedroom so that I could have a room with a door, so that when I hammered, I could close that off. I mean, he has a drum set and it was above that room. So that was kind of just our loud space of the house. So shout out to those poor neighbors. And so I used that. And then when we moved, we bought our first home, we had 1 child, and it was a 3-bedroom house. So child was in 1 bedroom. I had all of my working stuff crammed in like a bedroom that was like an 8x10. And I actually remember I have a really great mentor and friend named Roger, and his son is about my age. And he came over and met me for the first time. And he said, "You store a soldering iron on top of a sewing machine, and that's all I need to know about how you and Dad are friends." And I was like, absolutely. If there's space, then we just keep stacking for a while. So I used that. Then I was pregnant with our second child. And so we had some friends help us dig a trench for electricity to our garden shed out back. And I moved everything that was in that room to the garden shed. And then it's probably 2 years after that, we were then up to 3 kids. And my uncle came across an auction that had lapidary equipment, like rock cutting equipment. And he's a fabulous person. And he ended up calling me and was like, "Hey, this is going on. Do you want any of this? Like, I think I first got this picture of a machine. At that point, I was auditing classes at the college because they had a lot of machine equipment that I couldn't support the overhead on. And so it was cheaper for me to audit the classes. So shout out if you're trying to do something in 3-dimensional arts. When I was like 8, there was a woman who told me, if you're ever in a city that has a college, see if you can audit the art classes. It's the best way to get your hands on the top of the line equipment for the least amount of money. Yes. So I did that and audited this class. And so used all their equipment. He sends me a picture of this Genie rock grinder and said, is this a jewelry thing? And I said, yes. Are you at an auction or a garage sale? And he said an auction. And I just immediately started like Googling pictures of other equipment and sending it back to him and being like, hey, what about this? What about this? And if you get this, get this. And he'd text back and be like, well, what should I get? Some rocks? Like there's some rocks, but I don't know what I'm looking at. And I was like, just get some colorful ones. And just went back and forth. And when I went out to visit him, he was unloading a whole bunch of stuff from the auction. And I said, oh, did you find some good stuff? And he like took a deep breath and he said, well, after you told me what the first machine was worth and what you wanted to spend on it, I just bought everything that had rock dust on it because I figured if you couldn't use it, I could probably resell it. And then I was sitting there, thinking about my bank account numbers and how much had I greenlit him to spend that day. And just in a totally providential moment, he had purchased that entire lapidary studio for the amount of money I had told him he could spend on the Genie. Wow. And so that was that was huge. And it obviously opened a lot of doors for me to get to do different things, but he bought so much rock material that it also allowed me to feel a lot more free with cutting, that I felt like I could try this because I didn't have, a limited supply or so much invested in it that I shouldn't just try it. And so that has been fun. And that's allowed me to, I've given lots of different rocks away to different people because I probably have more than I'll cut in my lifetime from that alone. And it's still continued to collect. So here we are.
Did you grow up around art?
Yes and no. I think one of the cool things about being in small towns, and I'm probably prejudiced to this because that's what I grew up in. I feel like I hear a lot of people be like, well, I need my kid to be in a bigger school because there's more opportunities. And I would argue that 100%. And I love, one of my friends who's a teacher said if he could go back to teaching, he's taught at all levels, he would go back to the smallest school, because he said, when I was at a 6A school, if a one-armed kid wanted to play basketball, there's no way. Like, there's no way. Well, you can try out. Good luck. And he was like, at the 1A school, if the one-armed kid wants to play basketball, you're like, all right, let's go open the gym, figure it out. And I think that is true when there's smaller groups of people. You know, we still all have the same amount of resources as far as time. And I think that I just knew lots of people. And so I know that there were some really fabulous artists in my life that weren't necessarily, they weren't my parents. You know, my mom sews and she's like really great. My dad's a really good craftsman and woodsworker, but neither one of them devoted like a substantial amount of time to that or like sold that outside of our home. We just, you know, used the things that they made. And, but like, I think about like my junior high art teacher was phenomenal. He has since moved to New York and continues to be just an artist. I had a Sunday school teacher that she's a fascinating individual, but she was always very artistic, ended up having a brain tumor that when removed, she lost some abilities, but her art took a completely different turn and has just become just absolutely incredible. And as part of that, she feels like she needs to be thankful for every day that she has. And so I think for she may be going on 20 years of this, she has painted the sunrise every single morning as an act of thankfulness for having another day. And that has become an interesting ministry and also business for her, is that people from all over the world contact her and want specific day sunrises because like they're very meaningful. So like she gave me the day of our wedding and we have the day that we adopted our daughter. And so it's really cool. So Debbie paints the sunrise. If you want to look her up, she's really fun. And then when I first moved out on my own after college, well, there was a friend of mine growing up. Her mom had an art studio. Her name was Carolyn. And I can remember Carolyn just being so generous with her space and her paints. And she would never be like, oh, that's off limits, unless it's a piece she was actually working on. Like if you wanted watercolor paper, she'd tear out watercolor paper. I mean, she just was awesome. And when I moved to Salina after I graduated, she lived there and I went to like an art show thing and saw her and met her two friends, and they had an actual studio building and they just gave me a key to it. And they were like, if you can't use your torch in your, you know, space at your apartment, like just bring it down here. You can do it here. And like, and I love that. And I kind of do have this mentality that I say, I feel like artists are really generous and craftspeople are stingy. And I think like artists, like we're all like, none of us want to make the same thing. And we get that. So it's not like, it's like, oh, I would like to know exactly where you sourced your materials for this thing so I can make a copy of it. Like, we're like, hey, no, where'd you get those? Because I have this other idea that I want to take on and we can help each other get places faster. But we're kind of all running in our own lane.
A little bit about technical skills. Can you talk? One of the huge ones that I see a lot of creatives struggle with is relating well to timeframes. How do you manage priorities and manage energy and manage time? You know, and I broke it up like that specifically on purpose because.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Do us a favor. If this was useful in any way for you, please go to iTunes and leave us a review. Reviews will allow others to easily discover the podcast. If you'd like more information and to receive a free download, rediscover your destiny, go to ceofdestiny.com. Thanks again and tune in next time.